Hello and welcome back to Council Island, your go-to show for everything going on at City Hall, especially during this marathon public hearing that we are enjoying, perhaps, enduring, maybe. I'm Alex Williams, your host, and today I'm joined by Christian, Denis, and Mark. Thanks for joining me today, guys, to yap on about this. I want to start with Mark, because you're the first time Christian had joined us a couple of years ago on this show. But I want to hear from you, Mark, about what your impressions have been so far during this massive public hearing. Is there anybody who's deeply impressed you or perhaps disappointed you so far?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show, Alex. I appreciate it. I think what I've seen so far, I wasn't able to catch anything yesterday, but what I've seen so far, by far the most impressive talk that I saw was Courtney Walcott's. I thought he brought a perspective that obviously very few people actually can, given his history on council. And I mean, if you ever have the chance to listen to him speak, he's just an incredible speaker. So he had the combination of both persuasiveness and knowledge that I think makes the best arguments. Wilhelm's was also an excellent presentation talking about how it relates to transit and transit-oriented development and why we need to continue producing housing in other areas, not just around the nosing corridors. To me, those were the two that I recall the best so far. I think for me personally, the only persuasive argument on the repeal side is the lack of public engagement with the hearing. They could be perceived, could be real. I think it depends. That's the only thing that I think is really persuasive on the other side. I think that there's an argument to be made that perhaps it wasn't handled the best the first time go around, and maybe that we should be doing things more local area plan. I have mixed thoughts on that personally. Local area plans are great, but I think also communities need to fully understand the challenges that the city is in and the roles that their communities have played in that over the past 50 years, 100 years, right? So I think that needs to be made clear when doing the local area plans and what we need from them in order for the city to become more sustainable and grow our housing base.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think on the engagement front, somebody I think mentioned it yesterday that the engagement is a little bit backwards. And I know Mike's presentation at the end of yesterday, the little bit of it that I caught, he mentioned this as well, where it's frustrating because he said they're not able to access all of the information that people have given feedback on as a builder, as a developer. And it's because of privacy laws and all of this. And so the system in which we're engaging is basically designed to almost bury the engagement sometimes. And so although we have great planners, great developers, I've talked to some people who, instead of, they didn't participate directly in like the official engagement process, but I've talked to some people who went and said, hey, actually, that project that you're working on next door to my house, it would be really nice if like you planted a tree in this corner, here's why, blah, blah, blah. And then the developer's like, yeah, I can do that. And so I think making sure that we work on that engagement process, I think is a great way. And yesterday, one of the words that came up a lot was trust. So for those of us who have watched yesterday, Christian, did you manage to catch any of yesterday's hearing?
Here and there throughout the day, and then I caught everyone in the evening. So the last little leg from around 7 to close, and the 2 hours or the hour and a half of Mike question period was. Honestly, I was enjoying. This is my favorite show, by the way. Out of all the shows, this is my favorite one. I love just listening to council. It's up on the TV all the time. Yeah. So tell us a little bit, like maybe about Mike, maybe about some of the other performances, let's say, that you managed to catch yesterday. Let's get Mark and myself a little bit more up to speed here. Yeah. So I think overall, what I keep hearing Chabot and other counselors speak directly to is this auto rezone on a successful LAP, like separate from any individual character or cast on the show, right? Like this conversation keeps percolating. They keep, asking questions that are exploring this vein of thought. And I'm pretty, like, I would be excited by, in a strange way. I'm like, oh, Chabot, what a great idea. Thank you for bringing this up. If this really happens, if this is really the alternative that's being positioned and like pre-argued, I don't know, that possibility is interesting to me. For specific people, someone named Ahmed Gouda. I don't know, did you guys catch his presentation? He used to be an architect in Dubai. Now he's with Tricor. He was going through and he was hoping that council would ask him questions. And he said something that I think like maybe we know intuitively, but it can be hot button issues at the time, 20 years ago, are things people are proud of today. Right, the policy that was really difficult to get across the line, people end up loving it as they grow alongside it, and I think that's got to be the case in Calgary with the sort of the backyard suites program. I think most people are okay with that, and now that we're talking about the rezoning for housing, this is the next thing that people hate, and I just wish people could get over the line of like, hey man, in 20 years time, you won't even care and you'll love it, most likely, right? It's just this transitionary period that is difficult, I think, because it is a change and change is scary, and I think I understand that. So yeah,
and that was one of the things that I liked about the idea of the rezoning in the first place, was that it would spread some of the development out across the city, as opposed to it all concentrating in these confirmed business cases like Marta Loop and like Sunnyside and all of these places that were already experiencing so much of that development.
Yeah.
Instead, it would spread it out across the city so that, for example, right now in Acadia, there have been a couple developments down the street from me at the corner of 90th and Fairmount Drive, just literally a block away from my house. I walk past it every single day, and it's great to see more housing coming online, right?
Yeah. Every time you walk past it, you think, what a monstrosity, right?
Well, I always joke to myself, I'm like, oh my goodness, this townhouse killed my family.
Totally. Like I haven't heard from them in 2 months ever since it went up. Yeah.
But I will say one of the arguments that I really do understand and empathize with, and Inam brought this up on our first episode this week, covering this little marathon here. He brought up the frustration with construction, and how sometimes, like, a lot of these developers, especially because they're smaller projects, they might be smaller developers, maybe a little bit less experienced, and they might not be managing their construction site as well, right? We see a lot of fences blown over and fallen over.
That bonus presentation, did you see that?
Right.
Disgusting. Yeah, like, garbage everywhere, right? Like
right.
The poster child of what people would hate.
Exactly. And so I've been glad as I've walked past this site. I forget who the developer is, but it's looked very clean every time I've gone by. It has not obstructed the sidewalk, which I walk on every day. And so that's been positive to see. And I'm like, how do we figure out how to do that better, culturally, right? But then also, how do we, make sure that 311 is a little bit more responsive to those and in enforcing those. So that's something I thought I'd mention. Denis, go ahead.
Oh God, boomer Zoom moment. Sorry, I'm absorbing it by osmosis, watching these hearings. Yeah, I want to hop in. I have almost zero sympathy for the people who complain about bad developers, and I'll tell you why. If you make the process like impossible to function in, then you make the projects, just it takes like a Herculean effort for people, for entrepreneurs who are trying to get into the building industry to get through this bureaucratic morass. If the details of their project execution are degraded by that, okay, like maybe make the process less of a nightmare. And I'll give you examples. So I have been, suffering under the scourge of an HCO development, two HCO developments right beside me. And my wife and I, we bought our house some years ago now. And both of the adjacent properties sold like around the same time. And one, the demolition hasn't even happened yet. Right. So like our entire time in the house, this has been like an imminent development. And we've been here like 3 or 4 years now, 3.5 years now. And the other one is only just most way through construction now, right after the same. And actually, I think they were sold like a year before we even moved in. So, there was a period of time where the renter who like knew the on the lot 2 over, the renter who knew the development was coming found another place and left, and the developer needed a short-term renter to like cover costs, and so they found somebody, but unfortunately that somebody turned out to be a criminal, and it like there's like drug dealing and then like a triple stabbing, and then like things went kind of crazy there, so they evicted them. And then they just like couldn't find somebody. I think they thought they were going to break ground or do the demolition soon. And so it just turned into a squatter house. And then like the squatters started like erecting like a tent village and like plywood shacks on the property. And they like dragged in 2 trailers. And then there was like massive police raids. And I'm like, if you had a functioning process where the demolition happened, not 4 years after the project started, literally none of that would have happened. And every time I'd be like, hey, I'd call the planning consultant. I'd be like, hey man, the shack is there, and there's a fellow with a pit bull, and you might want to look into that. There could be some liability concerns there for you. And he'd be like, oh, I'm so sorry, Denis. And like somebody would show up within an hour, and then they would call the police, and like so they would always deal with it. But it was just this business nightmare that wasn't their fault. Like, what are they supposed to do? They had this huge problem imposed on them by the process. And so I don't think the complaints are reasonable if you reflect for a moment on what's going on in the system. And so I have no sympathy for the people who come to City Hall and complain, because they're the same people that make the process totally unmanageable, right? Through their engagement with it, and through their political insistence that they have the right to veto, and that they get to consult on everything, and everything goes forever, and then they appeal. So if somebody never goes to City Hall and says, Denis, I really don't like the mud and the snow, and it's very upsetting to me, I just want them to build, and be like, you know what, you're right. You're having a hard time. But the people who show up to council and whine, no, like author of your own misfortunes in 99% of the cases.
And I think there are some people who show up with the solutions, who show up and say, well, we can do this. This is how we can do this. This might be a good time to chat a little bit about Mike's presentation at the end of the day. But first, I want to hear, or I want to mention a few presentations that are worth going back and watching. Are Susan Quinn's, Peter Koning's, and Alex McCall's presentation yesterday. And then, of course, Mike's that rounded out the day. And we'll get into that in a second. But first, I want to share my screen and share something from right after lunch that I thought was kind of funny. So here we go. You guys can see that?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so this is City Council. At this moment, I was taking a picture of this side of council because I was like, oh, it's just like a bunch of white guys, and so I was taking this picture to demonstrate. I'm like, wow, our council is very male and very white, as is this podcast episode. But here we've got Rob Ward. We've got Landon Johnson.
It's a little grainy for me. Is it grainy for anybody else?
It is super grainy. It is super grainy because I zoomed in on a mirror of a stream and DJ Kelly. But just watch Landon Johnson here.
He waved.
He gave a little wave while I was taking this picture. So, and he also gave this hilarious smile at the picture. So I just thought that that was some levity we could inject before we get on with the
I
rest
love
of
the show and tell. We've never, as far as I know, we've never done show and tell on this. Well, not when I've been on.
What are podcasts for? You know, we're really we're moving forward. You know, we're doing something special here. Denis, why don't you highlight for us a little bit what Mike's presentation was all about and how that went, and then I'm going to turn the time very much over to Mark and Christian, who have not been yapping as much as we have.
Yeah, fair. So Mike Borkrystal is one of the original villains of this entire saga. He, along with a cabal of city insiders who he generously named in council for us, dreamed up RCG in 2014, and they did this because you could do a duplex, an RC2, or you could go to an MCG and start getting into like a larger number of towns, and there was nothing in between. And they said, like, can't we build a triplex sometimes? You know, isn't there something in between there? What are we doing with corner lots that aren't appropriate for an MCG? So they wrote the first version of RCG, and the development industry started to test it, and they kind of ended up at, you know, within the rules of RCG, the 4 up, 4 down model that then became, you know, what got built after rezoning. And so Mike had a lot of reflections on sort of what he learned from that process, the observation of how the developers started to use that built form and that regulatory framework, and what he thought was working and what he thought wasn't. And basically he says, you know, like the corner lot 4 up, 4 down is great. The mid block 4 up, 4 down with no laneway especially can create parking problems. He thought that was an actual problem. And so he had a series of suggestions. Basically, he wanted to, like, I think getting into the explicit details a little bit too much, but basically he wanted to tier it so that there was a functionally like an RCG 4 up, 4 down option for the corner lots, or for more unusual lots where it's appropriate for, depending, maybe like a wraparound lane access or something. And then he wanted to constrain mid-block a bit more, and make more parking requirements on mid-block, and just like, so you had almost like 2 tiers of RCG. And he had a number of technical suggestions about how to get there. And I think the best thing is if somebody's interested in technical suggestions, you just watch his presentation and how he lays it out and talks through the details. I think that's better than trying to summarize the all the nuances here. And then he also got into some other areas. First of all, he was, his personality is that of like a delightfully friendly grandpa. And so he got away with saying some stuff that I don't think would normally be allowed, but it wasn't the kind of unfair, you know, like, this is a bad actor. He was just very frank about what was wrong with the system. And so here are 3 things he identified as wrong with the system. 1, the developers don't actually get to see your comments when you give them comments. I did not know this was occurring. I just don't put my engagement in the hands of the city bureaucracy. I go straight to the source. The 2 HCOs that came up beside me, I just dragged the architect onto the phone through a little bit of persistence and some implicit threats about what I might or might not say at the hearing. I got the architects and the planners on the phone from the actual project proponents, and I extracted most of what I wanted out of them. In the case of the corner lot, and in the case of 2 down, I extracted most of what I wanted out of them. In the case of 1 down, I extracted literally everything I wanted out of them. And I estimate that the cost of them providing that to me was under $1,000. So it was just like a very good outcome for both sides. But you don't get that if you just submit comments to the city and then they're not allowed to see them. The developer can't know what you want. Literally, it's just broken telephone. The planner may not and probably won't fully reflect what you're looking for. And then it goes to SDAB, and then the comments get released through the legal process. And so after you're already at the appeals board, months in, tens of thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands burned, then you actually see the text of the comments that are causing all of the frustration. Profoundly broken process. That's just obvious to anybody who hears how it works. So he said, yeah, fix that, right? The second thing was the stuff is sitting on city planning desks for absurd periods of time. And at $500 a day, that's $15,000 a month. Those costs are passed on to the consumer, and that drives up the cost of housing. So he said, and he went through, once again, he went through all the details of what's permanent is causing some of it, discretionary is causing some of it, other things are causing some of it. He said, you have to fix that. You're going to have a really hard time delivering affordable housing, reasonably priced housing, if you're adding all these paper costs. He called it, the paper house and the brick house. It takes them longer to build the paper house. It takes them longer to do the paperwork than it takes them to actually build millions of dollars of high quality modern housing, right? So that's a huge problem. And then he said, look, you've got, and the city admin pushed back at some point, and the GM Hamilton said, Mike, you have other forums. This isn't the right place. You have other forums to air these concerns in. And I thought that was a nonsense comment. It's obviously highly relevant to the RCG discussion, what the challenges are with the regulatory framework. RCG is fundamentally a policy that is attempting to address housing affordability. If Council, as they've suggested they will do, are going to repeal it and look for other options to address affordability, then you have to have a conversation about what are the other options. Because it's not just repeal and then who knows, it's repeal and then what else? What are the other options? What are the choices? What are the trade-offs? And so Mike talked, I think, in a lot of detail about the guts of the system and how that it's generating pieces of the trade-offs and pieces of the costs. And I think that GM Hamilton didn't like that he was pointing out some of the severe deficiencies in the cities, in the administration's own processes and execution. And to be fair to administration, there's probably a bit of an element of underfunding here, right? With more planners, they could get through more applications. I also think if they were smarter about bringing on AI to automate more of the process, they could get through more applications. And they haven't shown any, well, I don't know if they're maybe thinking about it, but they haven't executed on it in a way that suggests to me they're showing any leadership in that area. And I think that's disappointing, and that's another part of what's going on here.
Excellent. Yeah. Thanks for that recap. And I do agree that's part of the challenge with this hearing, is it being a land use hearing. We're supposed to be talking about the use and not the user, and we're supposed to be talking about, specifically the built form and not necessarily the economics of it. That was a big thing on Monday that we saw, when Johnston started defending Nate Schmidt's question, and he's like, no, Mr. Mayor, you're out of order. That's not exactly what happened, but that was kind of the feeling. That was the feeling that was happening, because where else are we supposed to talk about it? And like Denis mentioned, this whole thing was kind of about housing affordability. Totally. And so, of course, we're going to be having the conversation about the user, because the user is the one that is needing that affordability. Of course, we're going to have a conversation about the economics, because we have to pay for this.
And I was confused about the overall. Oh, really sorry to step on your toes for the last, of course, by the way. No. But when the city's lawyer was going over what we could talk, she said we could talk about the overall affordability. We could talk about the overall situation, but not specific on units. And I was like, but that's not how people experience this issue. They don't experience the entire city in aggregate. What are you talking about? Yeah.
And I mean, also that also highlights and adds to the problems in the system that we're talking about, is that, hey, at this thing where it's going to affect this other thing, you're not allowed to talk about that. Yeah. Don't say that. I want to hear from Mark before we go back to you, Denis. Mark, what are your thoughts so far from what we've been talking about here?
I mean, I think that's really the big question, isn't it? I think when people are making decisions, I feel like there's a sometimes people miss out on what may happen if you do something, right? What's the counterfactual? What's the consequences? And they don't think about it completely. And if we can't have these conversations about like, why does it cost this much per unit to build, right? What are the factors that go into it? If we can't have this conversation in a forum where we're discussing housing affordability and this rezoning, then where's the place for it, right? Because all these factor into it. We have to remember that the rezoning for housing was just one part of a 98 action plan to create housing affordability, right? And it's just one part of it, but it's an important part of it. Like, it's a critical part of it, because this is the part that is like, we can let the market do the work rather than having city or government provide the funding needed for it, right? So we have to know what the trade-offs are on all sides of the coin when we're discussing it. And if we can't talk about the economics of it, that kind of blows me away. So I'm glad that Landon stood up for Nathan. I think that was important to see, and I'm glad that they got some clarity around it, because
we need that pepper on council. Sometimes we need like someone to just be courageous in even sometimes a bad question or a bad train of thought, because sometimes I feel like someone needs to sort of question the proposed guardrails of these conversations, and I feel like Landon does that basically every time, which I enjoy as a watcher of Total Council Island.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things too, it's interesting seeing the councillors interact with each other. Yesterday there was a moment where Dan McLean was questioning. I think, was it Peter he was questioning, or Alex McCall that he was questioning? But he was asking these questions, and it was Peter, and Nate Schmidt, Councillor Schmidt, was the acting chair at the time. Farkas had stepped out, and Nate says, "Oh well, let's keep it to the to asking clarifying questions of the presentation." And Dan kind of snaps back. He says, "Yeah, I hope we'll keep that same ruling for these other questions." And then kind of gesturing around to other people who have gone on and maybe pontificated, and then he just jumps right back into his question. He just ignores what Councillor Schmidt said, and it does get a little spicy. And I also think like we have to be able to talk about all these other things that this is going to affect. And I want to get your guys' impression as to where council is at in this moment. Do you think that they're starting to wake up a little bit to, I ran on repealing this thing, and now I understand like there will be dire consequences if I don't. There are good reasons to keep this, and we need to, if we do repeal, which I think a lot of them still very much will. This was one of their campaign promises, but I think they're realizing like, we need something crazy, crazy solid to replace it here, and we need to come up with it fast. Mark, I want to hear your impressions first as to where your feeling council is at.
I mean, I'm kind of on board. I think that that's still very likely going to be a repeal vote. I think it's possible that we may oppose the vote in total, though. I think it's going to come down to, it's going to be an 8-7 vote, I think. My issue is that there's a very big issue for the pro-housing side if they do vote to repeal without a replacement in place already, is that now the hardliners against any kind of reform to the system, even if they themselves are talking about possible amendments to RCG zoning or what they can do in council meeting, I have a feeling that there's a few councillors on board who are just anti everything within these residential neighborhoods. That really gives them the power if they repeal without a replacement. So what I would like to see is those councillors who are pro-housing but have questions on whether repeal is the right way to go about it first, vote to oppose the motion, and then now they have the power to discuss to make the repeal happen first, or to make the replacement happen first. Sorry.
So the last time this came around, I think it was Councillor Wyness. She there was a series of amendments, and it was very clear that I'm proposing this, and if this doesn't go through, I am not going to move on the motion. And what you're talking about, Mark, with the power at the few fringe hands, I feel like that is what I see being positioned in almost every question by councillors who voted on repeal. Like, oh, what do you mean we could do? What about a 3 and 3? You know, what about a this and a hoodie and the sausage that keeps being referenced? Oh, let's not do sausage, and everyone's. I mean, how are we not going to do sausage? It feels like that is what the questions are setting us up for. So, and can someone who's watched more seasons of Total Council Island just do a clarifying little clarificoo for me? The amendments aren't public right now. We don't know what the amendments to this are, and why is that? Could someone?
They haven't been introduced yet, so they're not a matter of the corporate record because there are no amendments yet.
Right.
So there was that exchange between DJ and Chabot, and I think DJ was trying to trip up Chabot because Chabot had talked about an amendment, and I think DJ thought that he had made a mistake and had accidentally revealed his hand about an amendment he was going to propose, or an motion arising he was going to propose, and he was trying to drag it out of him. And Chabot's a little too smart for that and pretended like, oh, no, I was just talking about a thing, somewhere else. But I think Chabot kind of spoke more than he should have in the moment and revealed that there is a planned, what it looks to be like a do it all through the LAP process, motion arising being planned from Chabot, McLean, this kind of group. I would call them like the anti-housing 6, right? And that's Kim Tyers in 1, Andre Chabot in 10, Rob Ward in 11, Jameson in 12, McLean in 13, and Landon Johnston in 16, or in 14.
Right.
Those 6 are just hard nose on repeal from everything hard nose on blanket rezoning from everything we've seen, and they're deeply suspicious, and they have political, like, not necessarily constituents, right? Because this issue is much more nuanced, as we know from the actual polling, but they have a political base that hates rezoning. And because a small political base of 8 or 10,000 voters can basically lock you into a council seat for, essentially your entire career, like Chabot, keeping that base happy is very important. And so they're really hard on that. And I think that, so I think DJ was trying to drag some of that out there, and it was not successful. But
I think it's kind of interesting. Chabot keeps talking about LAPs, and he's asking people, and he did have a line of questioning to someone who was speaking in favor of the repeal yesterday, where he was talking about hey, we do have to actually have density.
He's challenging her on it. He's like, well, if it's not here, where is it going to go? We got to put it somewhere.
Because your neighborhood, your community, we can't just put it not in your neighborhood. Mm-hmm. We have to put it somewhere there. Where do we put it? And so he's kind of on this LAP kick, which Mark brought up earlier. And so where that's going to go, I'm not entirely sure. Do we think that we are going to come out of this, or at least, by August, have some notice of motion about automatic rezoning based on what is said in the LAP?
That would be so good. I would have to show up to council one less time for the WELAP, because there's so much opposition in my community association to this WELAP. I thought it was the West Elbow Local Area Plan. I thought it was great. I was like, okay, I mean, we didn't get everything I wanted, but I feel like overall, this seems like a great plan. I can get behind this. And then my community association immediately was like, we're going to oppose every single rezone in our neighborhood based on the LAP. We're going to claim that the LAP engagement wasn't properly done. I mean, all the points that we've already heard before. And it's just why, it's just hoops and hoops and hoops to jump through to build shit. It's
and that's where I think Courtney Walcott was pretty right about saying, hey, listen, these people are saying that that they will, support that sort of thing. They will, engage in good faith, and they will compromise. But there was somebody who even said, I think my LAP is 93% of what I want, but I'm still disappointed. And I'm thinking, wait, 93% of what you want, you won the compromise. Like you won that. That is better than you could imagine. Yeah. If I got in, in some project I was working on, I'm like, yeah, it's probably 60% of what I want. I'd be like, sweet, awesome. Like I did it, and so I'm like, where is this going to go? And are people really going to be willing to compromise?
Yeah, the tricky thing is that like the NIMBYs are like, 1990s segregationists in the US. They sort of know that there's certain things they're not allowed to say, right? So they have to pretend that they don't, hate poor people in all development. And because you're not allowed to say that anymore. And so they say, well, it has to be sensible and contextual, and I have some concerns, and I like it in some places. And there are some people who genuinely have that view, right? There are some people who will be like, yeah, that's okay, that's okay, that's okay. No, I have a problem with that. Okay. I'm actually in that camp of like, that's okay, that's okay, that's okay. I have a problem with that. But because I'm not a hypocrite and I believe in private property rights, even when I have a problem with something, unless I think, there's like serious public safety concerns, like, you're building a chemical plant and it's going to be, ball all over again or something, right? Then I say, okay, well, I don't like that, but I believe in respecting private property because, if somebody tells me that I can't build a garage suite when my mother-in-law, needs to live closer to us, like I think that person is scum of the earth, right? It's my property. It's my mother-in-law. She was widowed and raised my wife and my sister-in-law on a very limited income, and then we're not allowed to use our property to take care of her in her old age. What are you talking about? Like, what kind of animal are you? People are talking about animals and slums and I don't know, but it's like if you want to talk about who the moral degenerates are in this, it's the people who have that view, right? That they get to tell me what I can and can't do with my private property, how I can and can't use my property to fulfill my family obligations. They're the ones who are out of line. And I think there's been a lack of understanding of how morally perverse their position is, but it's a deep minority position. And that's the thing. They pretend that they're like the middle who says, there's some stuff I agree with and some stuff I don't, and have a conversation. That's where almost all Calgarians are. And they kind of pretend to be in there. But here's what they say in private. I was talking to a veteran NIMBY at the end of a community association event before she realized what my politics were. And she talks about blocking developments like notches on a bed. Like I felt like I was talking to a frat bro about like how many chicks he'd slept with. And she's like, yeah, like 98, they wanted to build like 10 units and we beat them. We took them to SDAB and they didn't build anything, right? And she just had this like history with this, like, she's a head of a local community association, by the way. She's had this like 30-year history of killing developments that she was profoundly proud of. And there was no development that she wouldn't look for a way to kill it. And she knew how to work the system from every angle. And they've just learned that they have to lie about that being their goal. And they're, dangerous and socially toxic political opponents. And they pervert the conversation because there is an important conversation to have about what we as a community can accept in the planning process, and they sneak into it and lie about what they want to do and make it difficult for people who are reasonable and who can have a conversation to trust each other and come to compromises. And so, yeah, I think it's profoundly socially toxic and a really serious problem. And that's some of what we're seeing play out in this language policing.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see how things happen after this, and how we can hopefully manage to hold people to account. Like you said, you would be okay with this. You said you would, support this and that you would do this. Now we're going to hold you to account. And it's all on the public record here. So I think we're going to have to apply that some more. Christian, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you think is going to vote against the repeal, who you think is going to vote in favor of the repeal, and maybe kind of a little bit of their position and maybe what you might suspect happens after this with some of these folks.
Geez, well, looking in my crystal ball here, I really think there's only two people who will vote against the repeal full stop with no amendments. Like if what hits the floor is we're getting rid of RCG and nothing else is happening, I think there's only two people who vote against that, probably Schmidt and Atkinson. There's two hard pro voices on council. I think everyone else is positioning where they're going to bring amendments forward, and then they might vote against the motion to repeal. Those are my thoughts. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I think Atkinson is even, bringing an amendment forward, right? And so I'm not, I'm not that optimistic. I am hopeful. I mean, Raj Dhaliwal and Jennifer Wyness both voted in favor of the upzoning last time. And so I'm quite curious to see what they'll do. I think Denis is right that there are people who are on council who will just, they say, no, we're going to stop it here. We are a single detached family neighborhood. If you cannot afford a single detached home, or it does not suit your lifestyle, you are not welcome in this neighborhood, or you are welcome in this little corner of townhouses that we have in our neighborhood here. Some communities do have kind of a better variety than others. I'm interested to see, I was thinking about this today, we've gotten to the point in the hearing where nothing that new is going to come up. Council is still asking a lot of questions of people, I think largely because they've kind of built this whole hearing around we are rebuilding trust with people. And you've seen them mention that, and that's why they're continuously asking questions instead of just, kind of closing out and being like, we're just going to sit here and listen, even though it's the same thing again and again and again. So I'm most interested now in seeing what the debate is like between council and what motions arising and everything else is going to come out of this, and what the end product is going to be. I think it's going to be repealed. I think that there will be people who try to save it with some poorly constructed motions, altering the RCG bylaw itself within this, which I think is a horrible idea. This is not the place to do that. This bylaw was carefully constructed over the course of a decade, and then they're just going to make it even worse than it was made during the last hearing about this, by stripping down how many units you can build on a property, adding more parking requirements, everything else. So I'm concerned. But Mark, let's get some of your final thoughts, and we'll go around the horn from there.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this process to bring this notice of motion forward so quickly was rushed. I don't think it is well thought out. I think that council has a lot of procedural issues that they're working with, and that was evident at the very beginning of the hearing, where they wanted to ask clarifying questions. They wanted to get some clarification on what was going forward and what everything was. And based on how council's procedures run, they couldn't do it, right? So now we're going into a situation with the public hearing portion of it where they still have questions that they need answered about the actual process that we're going through. And citizens don't have a clear, I personally don't. Are they voting? Obviously, there's one vote for sure. That's to repeal blanket rezoning. And what happens with the Winnis Atkinson proposals to change RCG to 2 mid-block and 3? Is that a separate vote, or is that is that just all? Is it all vote together?
It's right? Currently all vote together. Some of them want to carve things out, and there's going to be a procedural fight at the end of the public hearing over what gets carved out and what's not. And maybe I'll let you finish, and then I can actually try to walk through some of the procedural implications insofar as I understand them, and how I think that's going to hamstring the 9 kind of repeal interested and lead to the 6 anti-repeal being able to kind of kneecap them. And I'll explain why I thought Chabot wanted to do that from the beginning, and why that means he's a pretty toxic force on council.
Yeah, so that's great. So at the end of my question period when when council was questioning me, I said, like, you have time. You have time to make a decision. You don't need to rush into this and come up with a worst solution for everyone, right? They still have 3.5 years on council together to work through the issues. And during that time, we're going to have more data on how the bylaw is actually working, right? So there's no need to rush into a decision 6 months into their term. So at the end of the day, I think I still think it's going to be a repeal vote, but I'm hopeful that we might just squeak out the 8 votes to oppose a repeal.
Yeah. Okay, Denis, walk us through this a bit.
Yeah. So I'll make one comment. The thoughtful, like the take more time, think more. I actually have the opposite view. I think that this body moves way too slowly. They should move much quicker in almost every regard. And if they can't understand it, they can't understand it in the timelines that they need to understand it, they shouldn't have run for council. Because I can do it off the side of my desk, and there are lots and lots of Calgarians who could do it as well. And so if they're not up for the task, they shouldn't have run. And that's a harsh thing to say, but it's honest. If you're not smart enough to process this information quickly, understand the complexities, and make good decisions, and some of them are. It's very clear that John Panasopoulos, who I do not agree with politically, is smart enough to keep up. We need 15 people with operating on that level professionally and cognitively on the city council. And we are going to fail as a city if we don't reliably at least have 9 or 10 who are operating on that level. But talking about process, so I agree with you, some of them need more time, Mark. But that's because I'm not sure they're operating on a level that we should be expecting from a city official, which is deeply disappointing. And it is what it is, though. Okay, so they've got this bundled motion together. It says repeal blanket rezoning. It says change RCG in a bunch of ways. It says a couple things about parking. They're going to try to unbundle it. And there is to be a procedural fight about unbundling it. In the process of unbundling it, they're also going to try to amend portions of it. When they're trying to amend portions of it, at a high level, there's a constraint that basically says the motion can't change fundamentally what people were brought here to comment on. So the motion says we're changing RCG, we're doing some stuff with parking, and we're taking we're downzoning X, Y, and Z lots. So if you're going to downzone X, Y, and Z lots, you could choose to downzone or not for each X, Y, and Z lot. So they can fiddle around with the scope of what gets downzoned and what doesn't through amendments. But they can't say, oh, it could be this other zone instead. That's significantly constrained, and Chabot did that deliberately. That significantly constrained what they can actually accomplish in this public hearing in terms of compromise, in terms of like a middle ground, downzoning to a specific level instead, that kind of thing. The kind of nice, or the charitable version of the RCG amendment motion was an attempt to get some change in through the back door and say, okay, well, we won't downzone, but instead what we'll do is we'll change RCG to a more compromised, like more of a compromised version of RCG. Unfortunately, what we ended up with is that you got RCG and you downzone everything. That's like the current form of the motion. And so there'll be attempts to I hope to fix parts of that. Because they're constrained in terms of what they can do by amending the motion, because there are limits based on the scope of consultation. The other way to do sort of a more effective and precise replacement is through a motion arising. So they can pass this in whatever form with some amendments or not, and then say, okay, we did X, Y, and Z, but that entails some extra work. Here's a motion arising going and instructing administration to, for example, bring us a plan to create a new base zone before August when we lose the half money. Go forth and do that. And then they have a couple months to do consultation. There's going to have to be another public hearing if they do it through a motion arising. So another $10 million down the drain or whatever this costs. And then they might be able to get it out. The problem with the motion arising is that the details of the motion arising are people are going to have different opinions about what the right one is, because the 9, we don't really like repeal without any replace. What their ideal replacement looks like is going to be quite different. And so they may not be able to agree on what that motion is. So what we could end up seeing is like 5 attempts at a motion arising that all fail, 8-7 or 9-6, with the 6 hard no's voting against every single one, and then combinations and coalitions of people who are, no, I don't like that, or no, I don't like that, joining the 6 to kill each version. And I think that that's the worst case scenario. I think it's a reasonably likely scenario. And I think that that's what Chabot planned for when he kind of stole a march on the more moderate and progressive councillors back in, like, basically right after the election. And I think Chabot knew what he was doing and knew that he was, like, procedurally hamstringing his colleagues and preventing them from making decisions that they may want to make, but then they wouldn't have the procedural room to make effectively. And that's why I think Chabot's a bad force on council, is that he's willing to engage in that procedural abuse to constrain the decision-making scope of his colleagues. And because of his experience, and he's actually been quite explicit, even in the papers, it's not his job to tell people how to be councillors, to help them understand the process. He feels no sense of obligation to his less experienced colleagues to help them be better councillors. And I think that's
which is a crazy thing to say.
Yeah, and that's a basic moral failing and a failure of Chabot as a public servant. And I think we should call it that, right? And we're seeing Calgary be an extraordinarily risky an uncertain policy situation. And we're hearing Mike Borkrystal say, well, all my developers are going to Chestermere and Airdrie where they can actually build, and we're losing investment in this city and we're losing jobs. That's a direct consequence of Chabot's procedural mischief and lack of commitment to constructive engagement with his council colleagues.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the civics lesson and the clarity on what's going to happen after this public hearing concludes and we go into questions of administration and debate. I think that's going to be one of the most interesting parts of this whole process. Christian, do you want to wrap us up with your final thoughts?
I'm excited. And there's one thing that Mike said. He said, McLean asked him a question. Any advice on moving applications forward to save on that $80,000 paper House bill? $80,000 of bureaucratic nonsense. And it's funny. I don't know if you guys want to torture yourselves, but I wanted to torture myself. And so I watched Pierre Poilievre on Rogan. You guys catch that by chance?
No.
Anyways,
No,
he's talking about housing.
Yeah.
He's talking about housing, and I mean, Denis here sounds exactly like Pierre Poilievre. No, Pierre Poilievre is not here in the room with us, so don't be scared if that scares you. But he's talking about housing, and he's saying it's the bureaucrats, it's the elected bureaucrats that, all the development charges, all the paper nonsense, and it's so funny that in Calgary, the capital of conservatism in Canada, that what is not getting homes built is not behind the scene bureaucrats making things difficult for builders. It is politicians and people who have value in their home and want to keep it. And so I guess all in all, this question from McLean, obviously a very conservative right-wing figure in Calgary politics, is just so ironic given that the leader of the federal Conservatives recently went on one of the biggest platforms available to complain about housing not being built in this country. The dichotomy between the two is not lost on me. So
yeah. The municipal political spectrum it makes no sense. It creates strange bedfellows, and I think it is extremely interesting to watch, and why people should care a lot more about what's going on inside their city. Because it affects you every single day. So thank you guys for joining me today on this episode of Council Island. Tune in tomorrow where we talk about more of this.